We're talking today with Mr. Lloyd Snowdeal of Berea, Ohio. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Snowdeal, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? For instance, where were you born?
I was born in Rockland, Maine,
In what year?
1927.
All right. And what did your family do? What did your father do for a living?
My father was, well, I guess you'd call it a laborer. He was skilled laborers because in those days they had their training, by experience, and they showed their skills by what they were hired to do. And he was pretty much at least a workman,
Was it
good carpenter, that sort of
in
stuff.
building trades and things like that, or
Building trades, build ships, lobstering, catching fish, having kids, of which I'm one, and
all right?
that sort of thing.
Okay. And then did you grow up in Rockland, or did you go somewhere
I
else?
spent the first 10 years, 10 years in South Thomaston, Maine, which is part of Knox County, which Rockland is part of Knox County.
And then where did you live after that?
I lived in Rockland, Maine, where I was, my fundamental education after seventh grade, I think, yeah. After the sixth grade, it was Rockland, yeah.
Okay. Now, so did you complete high school there?
I met all my requirements except senior English, which I believe was English literature. And I crept out of that by taking a test from the state Board of Education.
Okay. Now, as you're growing up in the 30s and so forth, how well was your family doing in terms of getting by and having enough to eat? I mean, this is the Depression era and all of that.
My memory takes me all the way back to when Roosevelt was actually elected, and his election day. Now, I'm neither a Republican or Democrat, but my father was a Democrat. There weren't too many Democrats in Maine, as you probably know, maybe don't know. Roosevelt never carried the state of Maine, although he had the ability to rob every bank in the United States with a stroke of a signature. So up until he did that, of course he was doing that by way of trying to get the country out of problems. He started a thing called, I think it's called the CCCs.
Yes, Civilian Conservation Corps. Yeah.
And I had a half brother, which was at an age where he was in the 3Cs. And if my memory as a small kid teaches me right, the CCCs, the government sent a monthly chip to the parents to help out the families with desperation, I guess, and then as well as give the member of the CCC's work to do, which was, in our case, was making a park in Camden, Maine. That's kind of known as the wealthy man's playground. Then my father died in 1937, so I was just arriving on 10 years of age. So my mother was able to, we lived in the country. And we had not even a telephone. The well water came out of the well in the winter, and in the summer it came out of the spring, you had to carry it. She sold all his tools, and he had lots of different tools because he had lots of different skills. And she kept us for about a year and a half. At that time, the state of Maine did not have any kind of assistance for the widows or the mothers of children. Excepting the children, they would take the children and board them individually in homes, private homes, which the private homes would get $3.50 a week for each child they boarded. And I fortunately was in a real Christian home. And as a sideline to that, just a very few years ago, my foster mother passed away at the age of 98 or 99, and she's still a mother blessing to this day, to me. She had a husband, and he was a college graduate. He had graduated from one of the most notable colleges in the state of Maine at that time, Bowdoin College. And he, of course, they had a son, and his son was 10 years older than I, but we kind of become brothers. And the father, I remember one time sat both of us down. He was a very gentle person. He never raised his voice. He never had him raise his voice. He told his son and I that the most important thing that he retained from college was never raise your voice. If you raise your voice, that means right away that you're not sure of yourself. You're just trying to make yourself a little taller than you really are, you know. And that comes in handy in debating, you know. But that's kind of my background. And when I was 13 years old, I received a letter. I still have that letter, by the way, releasing me from state citizenship, but leaving me effectively with no guardian whatever. That's actually where I was at. And I knew I had to get an education, and reason I got released because I had a job which paid enough that I could pay my room and board, which was at that time $100 a week.
A month?
No, not $100 a month. $10 a week. And for room and board, and that was food, and everything a kid would need. And we had our high school in Rockland had no, like today you have guides, you know, there was no such thing as that. You could find a favorite teacher who had a degree or whatever and get guidance from them if you needed to. So I picked my own subjects, and I picked stuff that I could earn a living with after high school. I picked all the math that I could get, and I picked, including commercial arithmetic, after I got my algebra and trig and all that stuff. I got the commercial arithmetic because I do it in my head. I took accounting, you know, bookkeeping. I took shorthand, first year shorthand, first year Spanish, and first year Latin all the same year. That was the job, because I was still working. The only night a week that I couldn't be called out for emergency service was Tuesday. Tuesday night was my night off, period. And that was because I used to go to my church's prayer meeting on Tuesday night.
Now, were you still living with this family at this point?
Yes.
Were you paying them rent now yourself?
Oh yeah, but I lived with that family. In fact, they remained my so long that even the only member of that family still living is one of her daughters, and she's 86 or 88. So that's really the only family I have in Rockland, except I do have a brother who is 73 or 4. He's a retired shipbuilder, yachts and that sort of stuff. He has a boy and a girl, and they have children, and so he's got a lot of great-grandchildren. But that's the only relative I have left in the state of Maine that I know about.
Okay. Now, as you're going and you're doing all of this, were you paying much attention to what was going on in the world?
Oh yes, Mother Blethyn was a retired teacher. She retired when her children were born because they were. In fact, she had a daughter which was a nurse in World War II and a member of the very well-known Harvard Medical Division. It was the first ones that went to Europe, her daughter. And she was a born teacher. And she was, I think, really interested in, I assume she was really interested in world events because we debated them all the time. We had to read, she read the newspapers and radio was just coming on, so you had to get it by reading, and we debated that, and I found out some years later that my younger brother, which is the one I have left, he lived there too, and he is to this day the world's best politician if it came to knowing what's going on. That's what he does in retirement. So she taught reading. She made sure that we got a good education. But we were allowed, we had to work, and that was good. I'm pleased.
Okay. Do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Do I? Yes, I sure do. I certainly remember it.
How did you learn about it?
Probably by the newspapers,
Mm-hmm.
more than likely. And then probably maybe the Life magazine. We used to she took certain magazines which were also a good material. In those days there was a Life magazine and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing, which was, I remember distinctly the first computer I ever heard about, or knew anything about, or even knew existence of, was a picture in the Life magazine. And the Life magazine showed a picture of a computer out in California, at Berkeley, California. I suppose that's the college out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the computer that was used to do the calculating for the atomic problems that we were having.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing the picture there, and I can remember it as today, just as if it was yesterday. And part of the reason I remember that is because when I later on went to sea on ships, especially Liberty ships, you go over and look down inside of the stack or into the engine room, and you have these iron grates which you walk on at different levels in the engine room, and these grates around the engine room and whatever, and the computer, the picture of the computer, which I now understand, it was programmed by on and off switches. So you had anything about computer navigation, you know, you could go around there to program that computer. You had switches,
Mm-hmm.
toggle switches on and toggle switches off, and the lights were associated. That was it. It was a huge engine room.
All right. I'm going to pull us back in there. So Pearl Harbor happens. You're still at this point a teenager. You're not old enough to be in the military and that kind of thing. Were you expecting that sooner or later you'd wind up in the war yourself at that point, or were you not thinking about that?
Well,
yet?
yes and no. In high school, I don't know how many was in my class then. Our graduating class would have been 1945. That would have been the graduating class. So in 1944, but there was the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and this is how come I got into the thing. I never knew anything about the Merchant Marine, period. But the V-2 program came up, and the V-2 program consisted of the Navy selecting, based on written exams and so forth, people to give 4 years of college training through the University of Maine, I believe. And of course you then would give them 4 years of your life, which is fair. Now, I had two choices to make there. One was, my employer was an electrical engine contractor, the biggest one in the state of Maine. And he had no children. And it turned out, I guess, that he really thought a lot of me. And apparently I had some intelligence. He didn't know that I had a book. But I did have a set of books from the Coyne Electrical Institute in Chicago. I don't even know if they exist. But there were two books, red books, and they gave you about everything that was known about electrical work. So, and working for him being a big contractor, there was lots of things turned up. And if I knew what I was going to be working on, I would look it up the night before, and I would know it all. So, of course, I didn't have to bother him with questions. Most of the time, I probably had answers that he didn't have himself. You know, that was a good idea. Not bad at all. But anyway, he advised me, and I honestly, God, I never even knew the meaning of the word, never thought about it. He said, if I were a young guy like you, I would get involved in electronics. I didn't know what that was. But the Navy V-2 program offered the double E, you know, electrical engineering. And so I applied for it, and I received it. The only problem was that it was getting probably in the later part of the war. But the Navy called up 12 people from the state of Maine for that program. And they put us in a room with no windows, I'll never forget it. And a three-striper came in to swear us in. And telephone rang and he was called out. And when he came back, he was ordered not to take that group of men because we were near enough at the end of the war not to be needing them. So he interviewed each one of us, and he asked us why did we apply for this? And of course, I explained that was probably the only foreseeable way I had of obtaining a good education in that field. So he said, "Oh, I can help you with that." So he wrote a letter and sent it me around the corner to the Maritime Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did know something about the Maritime Commission because we had a maritime school up in Maine, still do have, you know, I knew a little bit. So that's how I got into it. Obviously, I knew what I was doing, but I had to go through the ranks. I had to go through the boot camp of Sheepshead Bay, Long Island, and we had chances to take special schooling on particular type mathematics, and we had to be sure we had it for electronics. And then I ended up in class 10 of Hoffman Island Radio School. And from there, we got warrant officer ratings, and I wasn't 21 yet, so Roosevelt there was two in my class, me and another fellow named James Wood. Roosevelt had to sign a waiver on our age because the commission required you to be 21.
Okay. Now, when was that you received that commission?
Right around December
44, maybe?
it was, yeah, Christmas. It was, a lot happened that year.
Mm-hmm.
Right around Christmas time, right around the 29th or so of December.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the grade. Later on, when I turned 21 and had a year of time on my first class license, so I got my first class license, I then got a warrant, ensign, and I still have that rating as near as I know. If the company exists, and it does exist,
Mm-hmm.
I know right where my records are. So.
All right. Can you describe a little bit the setup at Hoffman Island?
It was a great setup to learn a big program in such a short order. A lot of it required out and outright ability to memorize. You probably remember that. I do that. But what today, I've been to school, all my recent years I've been to school up till every year I retired, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I have a copy of their what they teach and the subject, how they cover it. I've got a copy of that, an old one, mimeographed copy that they sent me, but it gives you credits for college, equivalent college credit and all. So today, if you was taking that same course under ordinary conditions, and we'll say you're working on semesters as opposed to quarters,
Mm-hmm.
it probably would give you an associate degree. It probably would be about 2 years.
And how long a course was it? How many
Well,
weeks were
they
it?
shortened it up. I think it was with us. It was about 8 months. Let me see, between February and December,
Mm-hmm.
right around in that area. And we had to get it because the exam, the requirement for graduation was a Federal Communications Commission exam,
Mm-hmm.
and that was not easy. Still isn't, you know.
What did you have to be able to do in order to pass that?
Well, the first thing, you had to have your Morse code.
Mm-hmm.
And that Morse code had to be so many words a minute. I don't know exactly what it was, maybe 21, maybe it was 16. I don't know. It had to be 21 words a minute for a first class license, I know that.
I think 16 was the first.
Yeah,
Very
I think it's probably 16, 15, 16. And then, of course, the exam itself was mostly a multiple choice, excepting when it comes to schematics. If you know what a schematic is.
So with
A lot
the
of
diagrams,
people,
drawings.
yeah, a lot of people don't know because they don't do it anymore. They use just square blocks, the lines,
Mhm.
straight lines. They would give you a schematic, say, of a multivibrator, and they would deliberately have mistakes in it,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to find the mistakes. And that's a good test,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And I have since trained people on the side in the radio station which I operated. I've trained people to pass their license and get their license, so I got some idea what it takes to teach them.
Right. Okay.
You know.
Now, while you were on Hoffman Island, I mean, that's sort of, in New York Harbor there, did you get much of a chance to go into the city at all while you were training?
Well, it depends on you. You see, I, for one, had trouble. I knew how to type, so I didn't have to learn that like other people did. I had it in high school. But taking the code by hand, which you don't always have a typewriter on the shipboard, I was kind of nervous about that, and I used to write pretty big, a letter, a print pretty big. And the commander of that base was Harry Manning, Navy. He was a licensed radio officer as well as being a major sea captain. And he used to come into the code room on Saturdays to practice, to keep his up, you know. And he himself was the one that gave me the key to catching my speed up to speed. I used to print too large, and that takes time. And being a technically oriented person anyhow, because of my prior employment, I understood very well what he said when he said, you've got to print smaller to save the time. And then when I applied the size I was to as small as I could, I realized I got my speed up okay.
So did you
I benefited that way.
So did you put in time on Saturdays to be in there? Was that how we saw you, or?
That's how I saw it. I put in the time. I wasn't required to do it, but I was making an effort. And of course, I knew at that age that you had to show an effort better than, you know, a lot of people can do a lot of things without much effort, and it's really useless to them, to tell you the truth, you know, and I knew that. Well, that was Harry Manning. Harry Manning, as you probably know, his record, that he was Amelia Earhart's private navigator, and on her last trip, her last and fatal trip, he had to get off, and I think in Seattle on the west coast, because his relief from the ship was over, and he had to go back to the ship, because he would have been lost, you know.
Unless he would have done a better job of finding where they were going than the other fellow did.
We don't know about that. But.
No, we don't. But did you take some time and go into New York City? I mean, did you enjoy that at all, or did you just focus on studying and nothing else?
I have been in New York City for many, many times. As a radio officer both in the Merchant Marine, I've been in the city many times.
While you were in training? While
I was in training, let's see. I didn't have to go into the city to get there because we did go in by train, you know, from Maine, but that was it. It seems that you could get weekends, not immediately, but maybe after half of it over or something, you could have gotten time off. I just never did. I think the first time I saw television was after I took my written exam with the FCC. And then, of course, I had to wait for a boat to get back to Hoffman Island, you know. So there was a television in the window of a store, which I guess showed 2.5 hours a evening, and it was about that large, and black and white. And I think that's the first one I ever saw. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you completed the training course at Hoffman Island, where did you go next?
Well, when I completed training, I, of course, had a warrant officer commission. And the next place I went was down to a hotel in Norfolk, Virginia to wait for my assignment.
So they didn't send you back to Maine first or whatever?
No, there was no break.
Okay.
They don't give anything. And the ship I was assigned to, the captain had just came back. He was over 84 years old.
Wow.
And he'd just come back from completing his mission at D-Day. And he was that old. And I've often marveled at the fact that an old man like that would be responsible for what he was and keep his ship afloat and bring it back. And the next captain that came on board to take the ship out was only 26 years old. He had graduated from one of the maritime academies, and we had lots of fun with him. Not because of him, well, fun, it'd be kind of like not laughing at him, but you know, we had, by that time, the maritime service of that ship at least had a captain, an army captain aboard, not a navigator, but an army by rank. He was responsible for the Army shipping equipment they were shipping, which
Mhm.
incidentally was 400 boxcars, European size,
Mhm.
knocked down, and 4 locomotives, because the boxcars was in the holes and the locomotives were
Mhm.
welded to the deck,
Right.
so they wouldn't fall off. And but then how we had kind of fun with the captain was that, you know, your officers would eat in the officers' dining room, and one of the, I think the Army officer suggested that we get together an orchestra or a band or something, and one person could play this, and one person could play that, and one person could play something else, but there didn't seem to be anything for the captain to play. So the captain said he didn't know he could play, and the Army officer suggested the information that, oh, the captain could play the swinette. And the captain said, well, what's the swinette? I don't know if this is being recorded, I hope it isn't, but they said, well, a swinette is to put a string across the pig's ass and play it, pick it with your teeth. But that began a fun with him, because he's a young captain, he's 26 years old, and so he took, after that, he never ate with the officers. He
Mhm.
always had his meals brought up to his office.
Mhm.
So from there on, we knew that he could be, you know, they knew he could be irritated some way or another, but
Mhm.
he took a good way out of it, you know.
All right. Well, how was he as a captain otherwise?
Well, we happened to be, on my first trip, our ship happened to be in a 117 ship convoy.
And, which makes me think, this is about,
Shut the door there. Yeah.
it's like,
All right. So you were in a 117 ship convoy.
Yeah, and our ship was the repeat ship. That means that our ship was sitting right behind the Commodore's ship, who was in command of the convoy.
Mhm.
And being a radio officer the first trip out, I used to work, well, we had 3 radio officers on the ship, but I was, of course, the junior one, you know. And I'd get midnight, but your repeat ship has a responsibility of, if the Commodore has to change course of the convoy, he would radio silence, because he would do this only in bad weather, otherwise, you know. He would radio maybe S102 DE, whatever he was D9,
Mhm.
D9, and then he would have one ship would repeat that, and I was the repeat ship. So I got to repeat that exactly, period, and that's it.
Mhm.
That means that he knows his signal went out and over. Now he's commanding that ship to change to sugar course, 109. And so that was my main convoy responsibility, because you do monitor for distresses and monitor for this and monitor for that, and then you do copy of BAM's messages. BAM's messages, Merchant Marine orders for the, you had to copy all that stuff, but the most serious part of the responsibility was in bad weather catching course changes and stuff in the Atlantic, and that was the beginning.
All right. Now, on that first voyage, did you have any submarine scares or things like that, or was it otherwise
Well,
quiet?
we had a little game, being the ship I was on, where I was on, if there was any protection for the convoy, I'm sure they would protect the Commodore.
Mm-hmm.
So even at my age, I had sense enough to feel that if God wasn't willing to protect me, then I guess the Commodore's ship would,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I never felt nervous aboard any ship anyway,
Mm-hmm.
until maybe afterward. But what we used to do is, at least what I did anyway, I would count the ships I could see, and every morning after daybreak, I would check to see how many was left.
Mm-hmm.
and we do move ships.
But could you actually see the whole convoy from where you were?
From standing on the bridge of the ship, you can probably see 15 miles or more before the curvature of the earth swallows it up, you know. But I don't know.
All right. Now, where did your convoy actually go?
That first convoy went to I like to say Algiers, but
Algiers or Iran, but North Africa.
yeah, Algiers is the place where at that time, if you went ashore, you'd see a lot of black little behinds, shiny behinds underneath the fruit trees. And what they were doing is they hire these poor people, or hungry people or something, and they feed them a mixture of wine and rice, or wine and something like that that physicked them, and they did their business under the trees as fertilizer for the fruit trees. And consequently, if you took on any fruit aboard ship, they had to sterilize the fruit. Whether you can have a good appetite with that, I don't know.
And do you remember about when it was that you arrived there?
Well, it was right around the time that Roosevelt, and there I could probably pinpoint it by looking up history. Roosevelt and Churchill and some others met down there at that time, and I was there when they did it. That's how the way I can get the dates. I don't really know.
Well, let's see. Well, they might have met. I mean, there was the Yalta Conference that was in February, but that was in the Crimea, sort of this.
Yeah, the Yalta Conference would have been. Wouldn't that have been Harry Truman?
No. Roosevelt went to Yalta. It was February 45. He died a month or so after it.
Oh, he did. Okay.
But they may well have stopped off in North Africa, and that was de Gaulle or whatever.
I don't remember. I really.
There was a famous conference in Casablanca, but that was much earlier. That was back in '43.
Maybe that's the one, Casablanca. I just know they were in the neighborhood. I have to say that. I don't know, because I'm not a person that would go ashore very much. I seldom bother to go ashore. And I do have a total number of years during the war and after the war, off and on over a period of 11 years, I've been to sea. And I'm not one that goes to shore a whole lot. You know, I'm just not cut out for that kind of thing. On the other hand, when they stopped having purses on board, and only one radio officer, generally I'm the guy who took care of the medicine chest. I did have the first aid, the U.S. Public Health Services training for first aid, and that has proved to be a good thing. There's been many instances where I've been aboard and I don't drink. I'm not a drinker, I'm not a smoker. I never had any desire for that sort of stuff, to tell you the truth. I don't really know why. I would sooner be aboard ship and tend to business.
Okay. Now, where else did you sail while the war was still on?
Oh, we sailed quite a few times across the Atlantic. We went to Le Havre, France. We went to Italy, not Italy, during the war. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Bari, Bari, Italy, right? You know where the ships, where all the ships was blown up. There's actually a book out about that.
Okay.
But there was Bari, Italy was secured supposedly, and the English it's their responsibility. They had it responsible. There was one radar. It was on the roof of a building. The radar was knocked down for repair work. And some German aircraft flew over there during the afternoon, and they came back at night and they bombed the place. And almost all, it was a small harbor, and all these ships got sunk in there, and some of them were still sunk when I went. In fact, they tied us up to a shipload of bombs, which was sunk. In other words, a Liberty ship, which was broken in half, and full of bombs, and sunk on the bottom, and we come in there with a load of, I I think it was actually scrap iron. It was either scrap iron or no, it had to be scrap iron. It was either scrap iron or flour, one of the other, one of the two times that I was in Italy. I don't know which that was. But when that harbor was bombed and some of the stuff went up, I understand that people 5 miles away actually who were standing up ended up sitting down.
Mm-hmm.
And the windows was taken out of the port and the whole thing. And yeah, and then on that occasion I did go ashore.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I went ashore, well, there was a purser on board too. The purser and I, we went ashore. But we didn't really want to be near that place when they were unloading our ship.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't quite know what would happen. And I remember specifically there was a boy, a lot of times when we went to a seaport, English-speaking kids would come around and act as guides,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then when you leave, any extra money you had,
Mm-hmm.
you give it to them.
Right.
And this fellow, this young fellow recognized the purser and I. When we went off the dock, we turned right when we should have gone left, and we ended up in some place where it was dangerous, I guess, where people had been stripped of their clothing and left to go home bare naked or something. And this kid recognized us, and he led us out of it and up to the right direction. I heard later that kid was adopted by a ship's electrician, adopted him and brought him into Portland, Maine somewhere, and gave him a birth. I heard that someplace about that same kid. So.
Now, did you do your wartime service all in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, or did you eventually get over into the Pacific then?
I didn't go to Pacific till the actual war was in the Atlantic was stopped.
Mm-hmm.
It was over, and then I went to the Pacific on the Hood Victory, which I was the chief operator on, and we went and took a load of prisoners. We took a load of people, of GIs,
Mm-hmm.
to go over to Japan to replace the troops that were there and
Right.
bring them out. And we stopped, I remember we stopped in San Francisco, and the FCC came aboard to examine the radio room, which in those days they could do that. It was before Eisenhower took out their money so they
Mhm.
no longer could. And the batteries for the transmitters were definitely, because the ship had been in the shipyard so long when it was being converted from initially when it was brand new, had been converted to carrying troops, and so the batteries were not proper.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the FCC, I pointed out the FCC that they didn't stand up, and so we got new batteries before we went over. And then we had on board, in our troops that were going over was the son of the king of the Hawaiian Islands. I didn't know until then they had a king, but I arranged for the king's son, who was a GI, going over to be able to go and visit his father while we were fueling.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought me back as a gift a Hawaiian shirt. I still have it, by the way. It was sulfur yellow with great big purple palm leaves on it. And wooden buttons. I still have that in my closet at home. And once in a while, if they have some kind of a dinner or something that you go to that's going to be Hawaiian, I'll wear it. I can still wear it.
Okay.
But I remember that. Then we went to Japan, and I can't remember the name of the place for all I'm worth. I should. It's the main seaport at the mouth of the river that goes up to the bigger cities in Japan. But our ship was, the officers were welcomed by the mayor of that particular port.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, I can't remember the name. I can almost remember it, but and I don't need to. But and the way that mayor did it is he had a table set up in a big amphitheater, like a gym or something.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was a public official, his doings are witnessed by the people around. So you got all these people around, and here you are being fed. And we had a little book given to us, how we could, how we could express our delight with the food and all that sort of stuff. And I remember that as well as I want. And there was another ship in there that had been an Italian liner, or an Italian passenger ship, and it was caught during the war in the Panama Canal, and then we seized it and then we stripped it, interior like a barn,
Right.
and made it into a troop ship. And the radio, they were having trouble with the radio officers aboard that ship. And I was offered the job to transfer from my ship, the Victory, to that ship and be in charge of the radio room. Well, I went in and looked at it, and I could see why you'd have problems, because it was not American equipment. It was, what do you call it?
The Italian equipment?
Italian,
Yeah.
and it really didn't fit. I could, a transmitter's a transmitter, and a receiver's a receiver, but it's nice to be able to read the markings. And I did a little questioning, and I found out the ship was full of rats as well. So I said, I don't want it. So we came back, and my ship had been sold or donated to the Belgian government. So my job would have ended there anyway, and so I got on a train and come back to New York, and then went out on another job,
All right. Now, how long then did you stay in the merchant marine per se, as opposed to getting into commercial shipping? Or
As commercial shipping started, a line called the Black Diamond Lines, which had been pre-World War the main mail route to Europe. They had the U.S. Contracts that carried the mail to Europe, and they had depended on that, and they had about 14 ships. So they ended the war, and they bought all Victory ships, which I had very familiar with because I haven't had two of them. And I got the job on the Commodore ship. The Commodore ship is the ship that has the captain, the senior captain owner of the company. So I sailed on that ship, and we made, I think every 21 or 26 days, we made a complete round trip. We would go south, I think as far as Baltimore, and north to Boston, pick up cargo, and then cross the ocean and go to, I think it was Le Havre, France, and Belgium, and to Rotterdam, and pick up, discharge and pick up. And then we would bring back, a lot of times, actually fresh vegetables and stuff from Rotterdam and stuff like that. But then the mail thing went to another ship, or otherwise, and so the Black Diamond Lines put their ships under Norwegian, or I think it was Norwegian flag, but one of those countries, and so that job didn't last more than a year or so. And then I went to work for the Standard Oil of New Jersey, and I like tankers. I guess it's because myself, I had no desire to go ashore unless for some reason. And so...
a tanker has a lot of space.
Well, the tankers themselves, I really had kind of a specialized, there was a sea captain, two licensed captains that would change places every so often, and the radio officer went along with the chief licensed captain, and they would sail a cruise and then come back and take it to the shipyard for annual inspections and add in or subtract anything you're going to do to it. And then we'd take another trip out with it. It seemed to be the same sea captains all the time. The senior captain would go on his months off. See, we got a month's vacation on every 3 months, paid. Oh, it was really a good company, one of the best jobs that you ever had that I know of on a
Mhm.
shipboard. Standard Oil of New Jersey was great to work for. And we went on a ship where we had a good office around up on Broadway and to work. And the first ship I had there was I joined it at night at dusk, and it was the SS Fred W. Weller. I have a picture of it. It's a World War One tanker,
Mm-hmm.
and it had twin screws. It made the total of if it made 9 knots an hour, it was pretty good. I think it looked like it was held together by paint.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of years of paint without any chipping, I guess. Had wooden decks over the steel on your
Mm-hmm.
walking decks. And when I went in the radio room, well, I'll tell you, I didn't paint, but I wished I had. It didn't have, it had the main transmitter, your main emergency transmitter, had been initially a carbon arc transmitter of the old deal. And I'd never seen one, but the arc had been replaced with 2 bulbs, two big plug-in
Mhm.
jugs. And the frequency was obviously developed in an alternator on the floor about so big around, and the bearings in it were lead bearings that you'd put in by lead,
Mhm.
and they had worn. They're soft metal, so it had worn. And the bearings, the armature wasn't exactly stable. I mean, here you're generating the prime frequency, and then you're doubling the triplet. And the tuning of the system was each layer above the alternator was a slate thing about this square, and the spring looked like you took the alarm clock spring out and dropped it in there, a big one. And there had 3 levels of that, and a hand crank, and you could tap off, you could see what's going on, and you're tapping off a certain motion of the spring. And no capacitors or anything. And of course, when you turned on the transmitter, it's so much noise in the receiver, you couldn't hear it anyway. And then they did have an emergency 50-watt thing on the wall, which worked on the batteries. That was sun protection. And they had a UHF transmitter, which was a shortwave transmitter. But it was really an old thing, an old Hulk. But I took a trip on it to Mexico, Acapulco, Mexico. I didn't get off of it. I didn't know whether the ship would be falling apart or not. But and it was at Christmas time, and my Christmas presents were sent down there to the shipping channel, and they got back to me up in Maine in July.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a white shirt in there. No, the white shirt had rust stains on it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, were you working still for Standard Oil in '49? Was that?
Oh, by then, yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I'd have to look at my license. I have all my old licenses, and
All right.
your captains have to sign all your licenses. So I did put together at one time a list of all the ships I've been on, and it looked like I didn't ever have a job, but actually I had the job, and I had every 3 months had a vacation with pay and flown home they paid for my flight home, and at home heating oil and automobile gasoline and stuff. I got 10% discount on, and it was a nice job.
Mm-hmm. Now, eventually you wind up in military service.
Yeah, I wound up by being on that ship that I mentioned earlier, going through the canal and getting that letter on.
Well, that may be the part that wasn't on tape yet. So tell us about that. You're going through the Panama Canal. It's like December '49.
When they brought a mail to get on board in November 8th, 1949. When I got my mail, I had this letter from the Navy Department, and I thought, well, if they must know what they're talking about. In other words, I wasn't old enough not to believe that the Navy Department knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I wasn't going to spend another war on board ship getting shot at. I did pass swimming, but I really can't swim. And that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I did pass in boot camp, but I really can't swim. Not really. And I said I'm going to join the Air Force.
All right.
I
So,
should have joined the Navy, and I think that's what they're probably looking for, but I decided to join the Air Force and be different.
all right. So when did you join the Air Force?
February, probably around February 24th, 1950.
Mhm.
Or maybe February 23rd, because my discharge date was 4 years later. I joined for 4 years. I figured I'd get good protection.
All right.
So I think it's right around there.
Now, when you enlisted, then what kind of training did they give you? What kind of specialization did you go
Well,
into?
basically, I went down to Lackland Air Force Base for the basic training, which I think was supposed to be 14 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was 23 years old then, and most of the trainees were either 17 or 16.
Mhm.
I explained that by saying that they lied about their age at 16 and
Right.
they got in,
Mm-hmm.
and they were mostly kids. And having been through what I had been and the trainings I had been through, it was really no problem to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of fun. In fact, I had some fun at training. I had a watch. It was a round. It must have been big, but it was real thin. It had a real pretty face on it. But it was the only watch in the platoon, and so when we needed the time, it all come from me. Well, during that training, I noticed my watch would quit. But sometimes, since I had to look at it so often, somehow or other I could shake it and it would go again. Well, you know, in basic training, you don't get to take any vacation or any leave until after the first 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the first 6 weeks, they give the guys time off and a little bit of the money they had earned in between, and they would go ashore and do what young people do who are very uninformed, and come back, and some of the big guys, they made all these conquests.
Mhm.
They really didn't, but they got to come back with a story. And the young guys who were really young, you know, they're raised by their mothers or whatever, the kind that complain about the ovaries hurting.
Mm-hmm.
Get that? That's how informed they are.
Mm-hmm.
They would decide, well, there's something wrong with them, so they would probably, the next time they get leave, they may really go do something and catch a disease. So, of course, having been certified by the U.S. Public Health Service for certain things aboard ship, I knew how to accommodate these kids and save them a little bit of learning the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
But they also would get a few bucks, and one of them went and bought a watch at the post exchange. It was a little watch, a little cheap, I would say cheap watch, stainless steel. And he sidled up to me, and he wanted me to exchange my watch for his, and he'd pay me a little bit of money to boot.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted, I knew my watch would quit, so I gave it to him. Well, during the 14 weeks of basic training, that watch went through the hands of at least 15 of the 60 people. And nobody ever said anything about it not working.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, once you completed that,
So I thought that was fun.
Now, once you completed that basic training, what kind of assignment did you get, or what kind of
Well,
training did you get?
my basic assignment was based on when they took us up for, they gave us all kind of IQ tests and junk. But you had to go up for an interview, and when I went up for an interview, the guy, he leaned back in his chair, and he slid back to some books behind. It looked like lawyers' books. They're about that wide and red and gold letters, and he pulled it up and pulled out my name, and he said, I see that you have a license and you have all this training in World War II, and we have, the Air Force has nothing beyond that they can send you to, so we're going to classify you a bypass specialist. So a bypass specialist I became. And from there, my first duty assignment was, I think it was I think I remember correctly, 29th Airways bomber group with B-50 bombers.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones, they were the group that had the B-29s,
Mm-hmm.
which dropped the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave them the B-50s as the first. There were 3 squadrons, 15 planes each, so there were 45 planes. And I was assigned to one of the squadrons, and there was, we all represented the group because they didn't have enough technicians to handle that stuff. But they had to have, it was during the Korean War, they had to have one squadron working all the time in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to jointly keep the Q-24 highest altitude offset bombing radar running on at least 15 planes a day. And we didn't have adequate crew, but none of us had any formal training, but as far as that particular equipment, called the Q-24 radar is what it was. We had to be ready to move, and on an occasion when MacArthur was pushed, his troops was pushed down into what they call the Pusan perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, the group that I was with was given orders to fly to England, and we placed our planes around England.
Mm-hmm.
We were atomic bomb carriers,
Mm-hmm.
whether you know it or not. This can be told now because it's more than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The security is good for 10 years. And we had 3 days notice to give everybody a chance to write their will and to pack up all of our equipment and fly to England.
Mm-hmm.
And in England, on our way over to England, we landed overnight in Azores Islands,
Mm-hmm.
which I appreciated because being a former ship operator, I had never seen the Azores Islands, and I was only on the map.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed that. And that night, then we flew on to England, and our planes were situated in various different places in England, so they wouldn't all get hit at once.
Mm-hmm.
And we were equipped to bomb a total of 96 Russian cities
Mm-hmm.
at once. And the idea was to set them back at least 3 years in their military achievements until we got the rest of ourselves up to
Mm-hmm.
snuff. So on that basis, I have never thought that we didn't really know what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Not until after one of our most recent presidents, and I'm not talking about the one we got now either. I'm talking about the one before, because that particular president that I'm referring to, he reduced our military capabilities so far that what happened with our most recent president couldn't hardly. About all you could really do is to clap your hands and say, "Well, I wonder how in the world even did as much as they did."
Mm-hmm.
That's basically where we're at. That really, we're doing a lot with nothing. That's the way I feel about it.
But in the days when you were active, there was still a lot of something.
Well, yes. I mean, anybody attacked us, we could do what our job was.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to believe that whoever had been in that office would have had to have done the same thing in response to what we did. And I have reason to know, without quoting anybody, I no longer have a desk I used to have a phone right to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
For my own job was with the FAA. I had a phone on my desk, and when I'm working, I could pick up the White House switchboard.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a privilege of knowing some things. And I really, and then I think about what General Eisenhower said. General Eisenhower said all you needed to be a president is to keep the top of your desk clean and have a fountain pen in your hand. Military experience tells me that if you're going to go up for a promotion and they ask you how many people you how many men can you supervise? The correct answer is 4, and that's the truth, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You can supervise 4 adequately, and they can supervise 4 more apiece, and so forth. And that's Eisenhower's way of doing business. And I don't believe that the current president inherited. Well, when they moved into the White House, somebody even took off the keys out of all of the computers, off all the keyboards. You know, it was just a big game.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, kind of game that went both ways. That's kind of getting tangential though to where we were.
But I would be scared to death if his wife got to be president.
All right. To go back here, let's see. You were based in England. How long did they have you based in England with that bomber group?
Well, I myself became ill, and
Mm-hmm.
I ended up with a what do you call it?
Did you have a medical discharge or?
No, they would like to give me one, but I wouldn't take it. They diagnosed, in England, I was evacuated to 97th General Hospital in Frankfurt,
Mm-hmm.
and they diagnosed it as multiple sclerosis. Well, I couldn't do anything I could not explain to anybody, because of security reasons, I could not say to the doctors what I was actually doing
Mm-hmm.
for work. My officer, my electronics officer, who was also a on-the-job training co-pilot for B-50 bombers,
Mm-hmm.
he had written up an order that the 3 of us, we could sign his name, and we had full responsibility for the electronics in the maintain those aircraft. And he couldn't even, he actually roomed with my doctor, and he couldn't tell my doctor what I was doing.
Okay, this tape is just about up
You
here.
see?
And you can't tell the people there what you're doing.
Correct. Just on symptoms alone, they made a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, MS.
Mm-hmm.
And they demonstrated it too to the whole, about 35 doctors, some American, some German.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I was evacuated to where I ended up in Walter Reed Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
8 months in the Walter Reed Hospital, 8 months out of 4 years. And they kind of confirmed the diagnosis, and I knew better, but I'm still connected to, if you have a secrecy clearance, you have to keep it,
Mhm.
10 years at least. At least I was under that impression. And so, but I had a sister who was in nursing school at the time in Portland, Maine, in the Maine General Hospital. And I conferred with my own sister, who spoke to a neurologist that she knew in the
Mhm.
hospital. And he suggested something. And she suggested to me, and I suggested it to the colonel at the Walter Reed Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had the stuff made, and he gave me a shot of it. And it was like the otherwise drab green of our room suddenly just became so clear and bright.
Mm-hmm.
It was like putting your camera back in focus. So I knew there was something to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he did too. And so they used to make up, this stuff was pretty potent. A little bottle about that big, but about that much in it. And you use a tuberculous syringe to give you a shot. So about they have you like 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to go back to duty.
Mm-hmm.
But I go back to duty CI'd to the States. In other words, you can't be sent overseas anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Technically. I got there anyway, eventually. But anyway, eventually I felt pretty good, and I would take it less time instead of 3 times a week, twice a week, and then finally once a week, and then finally dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And I did very well, and back to duty, and I was signed to a group in Mitchell Field, Long Island, New York. It was where the headquarters was.
Mhm.
A group traveling repairs, doing that sort of thing with the crew. And one of my team members got he's got a call to be transferred overseas again, and he only had 8 months to go to retire, to get out of the Air Force. And when I was on duty in the weekends, I would get CQ duty sometimes at Mitchell Field, and that came in on the teletype, and I thought, gee whiz, I'm going to volunteer to go in his place because he doesn't really deserve this.
Mm-hmm.
It was my decision. And so I volunteered. I sent a wire back and volunteered to go in his place, and I got sent to Korea.
Mm-hmm. And when did you get to Korea?
Well, I got to Korea almost immediately.
And what year was that then?
Well, I got discharged I kind of lost track, but I got discharged in February of 1954,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a full year before that, and even a little bit the end of the last year. I got three, I would call them battle stars, but I got 3 different silver stars, and I would cover 3 times a little bit, but I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at my book, but I went to Korea, and I got assigned to another one of these things where they need somebody who's generally qualified, who doesn't necessarily have the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I was assigned to the group headquarters, which was headquartered in Seoul, Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was assigned a TDY from that down to do something there was no legal call for, but we did have a combination supply and repair depot that we set up ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because we knew that was the way you had to do it to get the know how to do it. And so that was, I really was TDY down to Seoul, to Busan.
Mm-hmm.
And in Busan I had charge of some of the shops that did the maintenance, and oftentimes I would take a crew and go on out and repair something in the field, like
Mm-hmm.
not just electronic. It might be set up a new home, radio compass thing, or it might be repair of a DC power generator without moving it, that sort of thing. And when Eisenhower became president, that's the time I was there.
Mm-hmm.
He became president. His election, he wasn't sworn in until
Right.
the following year.
Mm-hmm.
He immediately went to Korea to inspect, and nobody was allowed to fly within 10 hours of his arrival and departure,
Mm-hmm.
except those people who was being held responsible for the navigational facilities that had to be up and running properly. And so I got to be one of those people to fly around ahead of him and make sure everything was just right. And so that was a high flight. And even that became, one or two times I skipped a lot of things, like I had 3 guys with me, and we were going to fly out of a certain place to go back to Busan, and the airplane who was supposed to carry us wasn't coming in because our runway lights was not working. And so we went out on a bigger aircraft, which had engine trouble, and finally got, we finally got to Incheon or whatever we landed at, and got on another airplane, and when they got to Daegu, it blew a tire. And finally we got back to Busan. None of us got hurt. But the first airplane, which was supposed to not be going to come in at the first air base, did come in.
Mm-hmm.
And on its takeoff, it cracked up right out there, and it was a C, or I don't know, 26, whatever it was. It had to have a gasoline generator to make enough electricity to control the feather of the propellers when they take off. And that doggone thing quit on the takeoff, and the plane cracked up in the ocean and killed all the whole crew. We would have been on it. And the plane that we did go out on had something go wrong with its navigational equipment, and so they flew in circles in a general area to let the agency and aircraft warning people realize that they were lost or something. And that's when they landed at Seoul, and then we went on a flying boxcar to go down to Busan, and they went out and come back and come out and back and out and back, come back, and they checked our gear, and finally they went. And then they got to Daegu and blew a tire. It was one of the darndest trips I ever took, if you want to know the truth of the matter. But the work that we did was a success. We had gone up to K41 to install a homing beacon, and the engineers had gone in and laid down iron stuff on the road to make a landing strip. And the purpose of that, with the aircraft that flew off of a Navy carrier and went up to North Korea to bomb, if they got shot up and stuff, and they would not land on the carrier, which was dangerous, they would land on the airfield. And I was in fact the senior rank there at the time, a buck sergeant. And when we got the thing up, and we had a tent down, and we got this thing up, and got it on the air. Some commanding colonel was flying in the area on his he had an inverted B-17 command plane. He was flying overhead, and we had 3 Navy planes come down from North Korea, and they had 3 different dangers. One could not get one of his wheels down. One of them had complete loss of his hydraulics, and the other one, heck, he had a problem. But anyway, the idea was how to get him down and not endanger the chance for the next one to get down. And this may seem weird to you, and it may seem even weirder to me, maybe, but 4 years before that, while aboard a ship at sea at Christmas time, in one big storm, I was wishing I was laying in my bunk wishing that I could get to sleep. If the ship would just stop rolling for a second, I could maybe get to sleep. You know, you put your elbows and your knees up here and you brace yourself. Well, I did get to sleep, and I did dream, and I dreamed a dream. And that dream was 3 guys standing in front of me. One of them had dark brown rimmed glasses, and one had pock marks on his skin, and the other one was kind of an ordinary person. And in the dream, I had dreamed that I had, in this situation, and that I had asked each one of these guys what they would do. And when it actually happened to me, I shut my eyes, and I knew what every one of those 3 said. And I lined those planes up exactly in the order that I had dreamed 4 years earlier.
Wow.
4 years. And they landed. One landed, he went off the runway down near the end into the rice paddies. The other one landed, and he went off in the rice paddies up here. And one with just nothing at all, he just landed straight right off the end of the thing. And right after that, the command plane was coming to land, and he taxied up to the tent. And he came out, he was shaking hands, you know, who was responsible for that? I could only say God. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. But that's what happened. It taught me a lot of lessons, you know. It taught me that when you really need to know, when you really need to know, it's important that it's there. It wasn't, I didn't even have to ask my guys, and I never told them either. And that was it.
Now, let's see, then you were...
That happened on that deal, and so It wasn't too long after that. I came back to the States. My commanding officer was a major, Shannon, isn't it? Come to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
He was a major, and he had been in World War II, and he didn't tell me, but I found out later, going to see later on, that this guy was, during World War II, was on duty over in the Persian Gulf area as a younger officer.
Mm-hmm.
But he was my commanding officer, and when it was time for me to come back to the States, he asked me where I wanted to be, and I said, well, I want to be as home. I knew I was going to quit the Air Force in February, and I said, I want to be as close to home as I can get. Bangor, Maine, or Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or whatever. And the first order that came back was to go down to what they call the MAS, the Military Air Transport thing. It was down around Washington, on Andrews Field, I think. And I said, ain't very close to Maine, you know. And he went back. He flew back to Tokyo, or wherever he went. And he finally got me to go to Loring Air Force Base in Limestone, Maine, and detached down to Bangor, which is just 60 miles from my house.
Right.
And so that was and then another really thing funny happened. I had a special screwdriver that I had taken with me to Korea. It's instead of doing this, you push it like this, and it automatically turns the screw. You've probably seen them. But it was mine, and it disappeared before I came home. And one of the guys that I worked with had come home ahead of me, still in the service. He was a higher rank. He was a tech sergeant. And while I was in Bangor, Maine, at the airport there, I was the maintenance chief for the electronics and the tower and all that stuff. And this guy came around from the installation, and he had my screwdriver in his toolkit. So he did me a favor. He carried it all the way back from Korea by way of stealing it, but I got it back. So you have some good things and some funny things and some bad things, and I've always felt that I personally am a Christian, and I just feel that the Lord takes care of me and my needs. He never promised anything more than that. And He's done it.
Makes for a pretty good story, too.
I believe it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today.
You're welcome.
My wife's going to wonder where the heck...